Hi, welcome everyone to this new video in which we will explore how to tell a story using LLM, which stands for Large Language Models. LLMs are an excellent repository of knowledge, like LLMs like OpenAI or Google's BARD or Hugging Chat from the Hugging Face or open source large language models. So they have been trained on such a large corpus of data, and they have billions of parameters. They almost remember all the information and knowledge, and they're also fine tuned, and they become an excellent tool for information extraction. And we can use these LLMs, large language models, to extract information in certain way to tell a story. But then, how do we extract information from the large language models? One of the simple approach is by asking a question to large language models. So asking a question to large language model is actually called prompting. The act of providing a question or statement to elicit a desired response, very important, desired response, is often referred to as prompting. I would say the art of asking a question to an LLM itself is called prompting. But then, how do we ask a question? Is going to ask a question in a simple question answering fashion, or there are specific way you can ask questions? So there have been many theories that have evolved over a period of time, and there are different ways to ask questions. And some of the techniques are like a zero shot prompting, or a single shot or a few shots prompting, chain of thought prompting, or a tree of thought prompting. So several different ways the questions can be asked. So we'll explore some of the techniques in this particular video, how to ask a question to generate an appropriate answer or desired response. But the best way to understand is to tell a story through LLM so that you can actually relate. For this, I have taken Panchatantra, which stands for 5 treatises, and is actually an ancient Indian collection of stories or fables in which animals play characters, and through that it actually tells a story in a wonderful way which teaches important lessons about life. And we can actually use LLM to ask specific questions about Panchatantra. I have always been very curious about how these animal characters are being used or leveraged in these stories. And we can extract certain information or key facts about Panchatantra, and we'll see if we can create a data story on top of that. So let's ask a simple question. Just asking a question called a simple prompting. For example, who wrote the original book of Panchatantra and when? And if you see, the question does not have to be very formal, because the large language models have been trained on varieties of text. Not all of them are formal text. So they have been crawled over internet and different kinds of text, so that they've understood how to actually understand the intention or the intent of the question and respond to it. For example, here it says the original book of Panchatantra is believed to have been written by Vishnu Sharma, an ancient Indian scholar and author, and written around 3rd century BCE, over 2000 years ago. And very interestingly, also says that Panchatantra is a collection of animal fables, story or moral stories that had a significant influence on the literature and storytelling in many cultures. Not only in India, looks like it also has influence across very other different cultures as well. So let's look at You can ask little deeper and ask, so can you list some of the translations? So this is another question you're asking an LLM. In this case, we are using OpenAI as LLM. List some of the translations of the Panchatantra in non-Indian languages like European or Mediterranean languages. So here, while asking question, we're also giving specific instruction to control the response that is being generated. The response should contain only the first translation made in the language mentioned, and also providing specific instruction to generate the output in a specified format. For example, the output should be in CSV format with the book name, language, and the date as CSV fields. So besides you asking question and allow the LLM to generate response on its own, you can also ask a question so it can answer, and then you control the responses, for example, the format. And you can also control the parameters of the response as well. For example, if you see here, it actually generated a CSV format file with the book name, the language, and the data, and the date in which the book was translated in a specific language. And what is the benefit of doing that? What I can do is now I can integrate this response with another tool and create a nice visualization. For example, a timeline. And if you see now, this is much better to interpret. And you can see the Panchatantra book was translated way back in 8th century in Arabic and French languages. And probably about 13th century in Spanish and about 15th century in English. And also it has been translated across many other European languages, probably in the 18th century and 19th century between. So the book was very popular, even though it is published like 2300 years back, and it has actually gone into different geographies in the world, and people have read this book and probably has been influenced by the stories that it has to tell to teach different lessons about life. We can now go a little more deeper and ask questions about the stories itself, because I'm sure these language models also have taken the Panchatantra's different translations, have been trained on it, so it knows specific information about the stories and the lessons. So I can go and ask a very specific question. For example, give the following details like instruction from the book of Panchatantra, and give the response with the following fields in a CSV format with each value in double quotes. You can specifically control that. For example, the story name, the key characters in that particular story, and the key lesson. And I'm also controlling the response, saying that the key lesson should be specified in less than 10 words. Okay. So besides controlling the format, I'm also summarizing some of the information that the LLM might generate for you. And you can also see how beautiful it has actually created. So it actually created about 50 different stories from the Panchatantra book. For example, there's a story called The Cunning Snakes and the Clever Frog, and says in that the snake and the frog have played characters. And the key lesson is cleverness can outwit danger. For example, you can see The Wise Old Crow, in which the characters are crow and some other birds. The intelligence overcomes brute force. So you can get the important lessons being taught by the story, and you can also summarize them and see that which are the different traits or outcomes which has been kind of highlighted by this particular book, Panchatantra. So you can now take all the lessons and create a word cloud. So this is by integrating, asking a question to the LLM and generating the output in a specific format, and then integrating with the tool to kind of create beautiful visualization through which we can tell a story. For example, here you see some of the key traits that have been highlighted by Panchatantra, like wisdom or strength, even greed, some of the positive and negative traits, right? And adversity, deceptiveness, unity, right? You can see through this, there are about, I think, about 75 stories. You can also ask the same question to even LLM, to how many total stories are there in the book of Panchatantra. So they have created beautiful stories and tell lessons depicting different traits through this animal characters. And wisdom is highlighted with a bold letter and a bigger font, because there are so many stories which basically talks about wisdom here. For example, the lion and the jackal, this is a wisdom can overcome strength. There is a book called The Wise Brahmin, wisdom is superior to physical strength, right? Wisdom is greater strength. So many stories to kind of highlight the importance of wisdom. Now here, we can go deep dive. I've been very curious about which are the different animals which have been depicted as characters and why. For example, here I asked a question called, in the story of the lion and the jackal from the book of Panchatantra, the jackal is associated with intelligence. So here I'm asking a question, but before that, I'm also giving an example to the LLM to control or to generate output in that particular format. So this is also called a single shot prompting, giving an example for generating response. So I'm saying similarly, like the way I've given an example here, saying the story, in the story the lion and jackal from the book of Panchatantra, the jackal is associated with the intelligence. You list the characters and their associated key traits, the characters, the animal characters from other stories from the book of Panchatantra. And so I'm giving an example which highlights how the response would be generated, and the format, the give details in a JSON format like CSV, using the field character and traits. So if you can see, it has generated output like the character is a jackal and the trait is basically intelligent, because jackal is always associated with the intelligence, which of course I have given the example here. But hare, in the story of hare and tortoise, I think most of would know speed and confidence. Monkey is associated with cleverness and resourcefulness, and so on and so forth. And if I look at some of the response that is generated, is beautiful. Basically says the crow, ingenuity and problem solving. Fox is adaptability and deception. Tortoise, in the story of hare and tortoise, where the tortoise ultimately wins the race against hare, it depicts the character of patience and perseverance. The lion, of course, courage and leadership, right? Snake is lioness and venomous. Frog is again wisdom and adaptability, and hardworking and teamwork. It's very interesting to know, so many years ago, 2000 years ago, the author Vishnu Sharma, right, Pandit Vishnu Sharma, has actually so keenly observed these animals. Of course, this would have been told the fables many years before that. So people have observed these animals, what trait they actually depict, and they picked up the right animals as characters to tell the stories. Okay, so it's very difficult to actually extract this information if you go and look at the content now, but LLMs can actually help you to quickly ask the question and generate this kind of information. We can also use something called few shot prompting. For example, in this case, I'm asking a question, give the associated key terms of each sentences mentioned in the input section. So I'm basically saying that you extract the key terms from the sentences mentioned in the input section, and I have giving a section here separately. So this whole thing is one question that I'm sending it to the LLM. Based on the examples given below, I'm also giving some examples. For example, here I'm saying that wisdom can overcome strength. This is the story in which I'm basically extracting the key terms called wisdom and strength. Avoid falling into debt. So avoid debt. Greed can bring ruin. So the two key terms are greed and ruin. So the way I want the LLM to extract information in two different terms, and I'm also specifying the response should be in CSV format with the following fields: sentence, term 1 and term 2. The term 1 should be the key trait, and term 2 must be the benefit or the risk associated with the trait or resulting from the trait, and it should be a noun. I have to specifically ask this. And term 1, term 2 should be one word, not two words. It should be a unigram mentioned in the sentence. So you can give a very clear instruction, and you can also give multiple examples. So I'm giving instructions here, clear instructions of what to be generated. And I'm also giving some examples so the LLMs can actually understand how to generate those responses. And here you can give all the lessons. Because the text is quite large, I've just given a placeholder here. You can give all the lessons that you have generated from the previous response. In fact, that is also called chaining. In LLM, you can actually feed the response from one LLM prompting to the next prompting as well. And this is called few shot prompting because I have given multiple examples to learn from and then give the response based on that. And it actually has generated a beautiful response, and I created a network graph out of it. And if you see, the greed is associated with downfall, and greed can lead to downfall, can lead to ruin, self-destruction, and loss. Similarly, arrogance is also can lead to downfall. So the way the stories are told, okay, to kind of the important lessons about life again, and how this different traits and outcomes of that or benefits or risk associated with that particular trait is depicted beautifully here. For example, intelligence helps you to overcome challenges or a danger. It can be used as a weapon. It's one of the most important weapon. And it also you should avoid debt and imitation. Some of the stories which will tell talks about that. So here in this video we learned how to ask a question. And when you ask a question, not only simply ask a question, but you can also control the response through many different techniques by giving a specific instructions, giving one or many examples so that the LLM can understand how to generate a response. And we can also generate the response in a specific format so that we can integrate with the other tools to kind of leverage that response and create a beautiful story or data story on top of that. So this is how to use LLMs, but I will also now go through in a Jupyter notebook how to actually get things done. So if you are also interested in knowing how to get it done through programming or API integration, so here I'm going through with that. So here's Jupyter notebook which names Panchatantra tell a story. So you need to integrate with install two different APIs. So OpenAI also has a API and LangChain. These are the most important APIs. So LangChain is basically a framework which helps you to integrate with multiple different LLM large language models. So import all the required libraries here, and you have to integrate with OpenAI through the key. So you have to sign up with OpenAI and get a key and enter the key here, and then you have to instantiate a chart OpenAI model. This is a conversational LLM chat model, which also remembers the context of the previous question and responses. We can also control how much it can remember. We can pass a temperature here, the temperature typically varies from 0.0 to 1.0, and 0.0 means more deterministic outcome, and if you want a more artistic and give freedom in how the response will be generated, you can increase this particular value. Especially when you're doing a fact finding, typically you set the value to be 0.0. And uh, because you're going to use a conversational way of asking questions, typically like a chat GPT, okay, we can also specify the window memory, how much of the previous context of the question and answer should remember to answer the next question. Here I am basically specified as k equal to 1, but you can also specify a larger value. Of course, as we keep on asking more and more questions, because the previous context is also sent to the LLM, right? If you have a larger window, then the input tokens, the question size would continuously increase. So you should always control how many previous responses it should remember. And then we'll initialize a conversation chain with the language model, memory, and of course, if you want to debug, you can also do it verbiage. So in this case, by default, it uses the turbo model, GPT 3.5. And you can also create a template how the question should be asked. So this is of course a simple template, basically says the question and is asking the answer itself. And we'll initialize with the LangChain. We'll give the prompt and the large language model. And then here a simple question you're asking, who wrote the original book of the Panchatantra and when? Like we saw, it responds with that. And then list 15 different translations of Panchatantra in the non-Indian language like European and East Asian. And if you see it actually responds, we'll ask the question and response. And now because the response is specified in a CSV format, we can actually use a pandas read CSV and pass that response to the data frame, to create data frame. And then we can work on the data frame. For example, sort the values based on the date. And then you can create a UI on top of it, like we created a timeline on top of that. For simplicity, I have how to create visualizations. I have not shown here, because that we can always learn how to create a UI from the data frame. If you already have data in this particular format, how to create a timeline. So similarly, you can simply keep on asking questions and generate a response in the desired format. And here, of course, I've asked another question about Indian languages, how the Panchatantra has been translated. And you can see it was translated in varieties of languages. Like in 9th century, it's translated in Kannada and Tamil, Telugu, Odia in 13th century, and so on and so forth. How many stories are there in the book of Panchatantra? The 75 stories in the Panchatantra book. Key lessons. So this is all about now how to ask a question and generate a response. So this is the key lessons, story name, key characters, and key lessons. One important technique here, if you want to see, I am generating the response for 10 stories at a time. And because I have seen the language models do not give more than a specified number of tokens in the response, so you can control the length of the response as well. For example, I'm asking 10 stories from the book of Panchatantra, and once it gives the information about the story name, key characters, and key lessons, about 10 stories, then I can again ask, thank you, please give details of another 10 stories. So you can keep going back to the large language models and generate the response, but I'm not specifying what response. I'm simply saying another set of stories that are not listed in the previous response. And for that, I need to remember or the language model need to be given the context of the previous response. So here I have increased the window memory to be 3. The previous 3 responses has to be included. So it knows that what were not listed in the previous response, and it generates unique responses again. So sometimes when you want to extract more and more information about a specific question, you can always keep going back to the language model and keep generating the response. until the number of responses you want or is available, because at some point of time the language model might also say that I don't have any more stories. Okay, and I'm basically creating a word cloud on top of that. Same thing. So this is now repeatedly asking a question, getting a response from the language models and creating those beautiful visualizations that we have seen so far. So thank you for watching this video, and see if you can also ask some other questions and create a wonderful response and create some beautiful visualizations. Let me know in the video comments, and you can subscribe to the channel, and see you in the next video with some advanced topics of prompting and asking questions, and how to extract information from the other sources of uh, knowledge, or the other sources of documents. Okay. Thank you, and see you in the next video.